What if somebody told you, as a Gambian, that you cannot vote or vote for a representative into the House of Parliament to speak on your behalf? What if somebody told you that in order to go to certain parts of Gambia, as a Gambian citizen, you need a permit? How would you feel? Hi, welcome to my channel. Here we'll seek to discuss some of the issues that are facing us as a country, which is the Gambia. So let's get into it. The Gambia is facing a myriad of problems. We're in the 21st century, for God's sake. It's 2022. And we live in a country where citizens still cannot have access to clean drinking water. One of the problems that is facing us as a country right now is the issue of the division within our political space. And for the purposes of this video, we'll call it tribalism. It's on everybody's lips, everybody's talking about it, but nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything has a context, an origin, and there are factors that determine how events take place or how they come to be. So that's what we intend to talk about, especially for you, the younger generation. It will serve you right to try to figure out ways to undo the damages that the current and past generations have done to your community, to your society, to your country. Because as citizens of the Gambia, we are condemned to live in that country. And as Africans, we need to be tired and ashamed of always trying to find an escape route to other people's countries just because our countries are not conducive. We need to change that situation. But first things first, tribalism. Like I said, how would you feel if somebody told you that you need a permit to visit certain parts of the Gambia? How would you feel if somebody told you that your citizenship is worth nothing because you don't have a voice? You cannot agitate for yourself. You cannot fight for your own rights. You don't have a say in what decisions the government made or is about to make. You are just a protected person. That is exactly the scenario that Gambians faced in the years leading up to its independence prior to 1959. And that period witnessed the birth of what we will call tribalism in our politics. So let's get into it. As we all know, the Gambia was a British colony. We will get more into the history of that colonialism in subsequent videos. But as a British colony, the Gambia was divided into two. We have the protectorate and the colony. The colony is what we will call today Banjul, but back in the day it was called Bathurst and Combo St. Mary's. The locals will call it Banjul and Combo Tuba Bango. The rest of the country that we call Gambia today was entirely a British protectorate, which means the citizens had no rights, they had no voices, they had no representation. In other words, the rest of the country was considered British territory. If anybody should invade or if anybody should attack any portion of that country, you are in essence attacking the British Empire, but the citizens, they don't matter. They were not considered Gambians. Only the people who were born in the colony, which is Banjul and Combo St. Mary's, were considered citizens. They had a voice per se. But even then there were restrictions. You had to be a yard owner or a compound owner, as we would call it today. Before the advent of colonialism, the people were mostly subsistent farmers. They grow the food that they eat. They depend on themselves. But with colonialism, which seeks nothing other than to further the interests of the colonial masters, introduced cash crop production in the Gambia. With that cash crop production, they promised the farmers that if you grow groundnuts, we will buy it from you and you'll have some income that you can use to help yourself. But as anything that the colonialists would do, the interest that was accrued from that agriculture served them more than it served the farmers. And based on the fact that the Gambian farming season is entirely based on 3-4 months of rainy season, that was not sustainable. So all the economic opportunities in terms of employment were concentrated in the colony area, which was Banjul or Bathurst and Combo St. Mary's. That was the situation in the country. So like we do now, young people would not stay on the farms. They migrated to the coastal areas, which is Banjul and Combo St. Mary's, to find employment as day laborers at the docks, where they could make a little bit of money so they can send it back to their families. But during this period, like I said, the entire country was cut off from the politics and the administration of the country. They had no say, no voice. The chiefs were implanted in their communities. Those who were favorable to the British were appointed as chiefs. Because before that also there was some conflicts between local traditional chiefs and the British administrators. So they had to depose some chiefs and put in their own favorite people who become chiefs of those regions. But we'll get more into that. Just to cut a long story short, we wouldn't like to make this video too long. So within that context, people started migrating from the provinces, coming down to the coast to look for employment opportunities. But because of the nature of the colony area also, because as we all know, Banjul is sitting on an island and farming was not a big enterprise, the natives of that area, or the settlers or the residents of Banjul, usually depend on menial jobs in government, which was being clerks, or going to the docks to be laborers. So suddenly there's this influx of natives from the provinces looking for employment. That led to hostilities because the economic interests of the natives or the residents of Banjul was being threatened by the large number. I wouldn't say large number because Gambia is a small population, but if there's not much work to go around and then you suddenly see people, young people migrating from the provinces coming down, there'll obviously be some hostilities because there was not enough jobs to go around. The same immigration problems we talk about, or the natives of countries in Europe and America talk about, we had it. But ours was more of a issue with internal migrants. So these hostilities developed because those natives and residents of Banjul saw the influx of provincial natives as a threat to their economic well-being. So they started taunting them, mocking them, looking down on them. That made a lot of people uncomfortable. These aren't so far-fetched stories from centuries ago. These are stories that some of our fathers are alive. They could attest to. Some of our grandfathers, and for some of you, your great-grandfathers or uncles could attest to this story. And this is not by any means trying to denigrate anybody or put the blame anywhere, but if we have issues in the country, we need to talk about them with honesty, sincerity, and bringing out the facts. At least from the perspective of people who felt that they've been oppressed. And then the people who were accused of oppressing can also lay out their side of the story, and together we can come up with solutions. This is all geared towards creating a better Gambia for the younger generation to see themselves as Gambians, as one people that should unite and fight and make sure they live dignified lives, rather than seeking to abandon their homes and travel across the world to go find better havens where they can make a living. So as it is the most glaring problem that is facing us as a country, the division along ethnic lines, we sought to start this series of videos addressing that. So that was the issue in the country. People leaving their farms to come and seek better economic opportunities in Banjul and Combo St. Mary's. And because of that influx and the threatening of economic interests of the locals, it led to hostilities. Now, out of that situation and the fact that the rural natives were seeing that they were completely excluded from the administration of the country, they started forming welfare associations. Those from the Nyomi region will form their own association because they share the same geographical area, probably have some kind of kinship. Those from Badibu also had their own. Those from Combo Santo They had their own association. Those from the hinterland like Bolonkono, Basse and the areas like that, they also had their own associations. So all these were geared towards helping each other as welfare associations. If you come there new, probably one of them will host you in their little shack that they have. And when somebody dies, because transport was a huge problem back then, they will come together and see how best they can raise some money and, you know, help the person back to their families in the provinces for decent burial. These associations were created. Lilai Warasuri Kafo, Kambo Kafo, Nyomi Kafo, you name them, they were all there, comprised of rural natives, because they need to look out for each other's welfare. And that's not a new phenomenon. Here we have the AGERA, Gambia, Atlanta Gambia Association, or whatever other chapter you call it across Europe that seeks to bring Gambians together. And there are even bigger ones that are for the African diaspora or for other countries. It's not anything new. People come together to cater for their own welfare, especially if they find themselves in strange lands. So these were things that were happening. So out of that association, obviously they had to meet, obviously they had to come together and have community activities. They started noticing that we are left out of a lot of things that are taking place in this country. And it is our right to be included. And before they formed any concrete association or organization that was political in nature, another person who was not a native of the provinces saw the injustice, and you all know him, Edward Francis Small. He was a missionary, and when he went into the provinces, he ran across some of these issues that the people were silently talking about. The famous slogan, no taxation without representation, that he coined, was something that shifted him from being that missionary that was going to spread the good book to the provincial natives to somewhat of an activist. Like, people are in this country, they have no voice, and they pay taxes. That is unjust. So he started that advocacy. Guess what they called him? An agitator. He suddenly became somewhat of an outsider because he was agitating for the inclusion of the people who are in the provinces who are paying taxes but don't have a voice. But like I said, he was not your traditional politician as we know them, but we will probably get more into the history of the man himself. But he was one of those pioneers who started advocating for the inclusion of people in the affairs of the country, just because it is unjust for them to be paying taxes and yet have no voice in terms of representation. So he started that movement, and they call him an agitator. So we'll call it the agitation for independence, the agitation for inclusion and self-rule. So the rural natives obviously will pick up on that. And it was during that time, or around that time, in the 1940s, early 40s going on, that the Second World War took place. Lots of Africans were recruited into the West African Frontier Force to go fight in Burma and other parts of the world. And there was a mingling between Africans from Gambia, from Sierra Leone, from Ghana, from, or Gold Coast back then. They were all coming together and seeing what was happening in the world, and they started talking about this independence movement. So obviously the people who came back had some political views. So here we are with a entire segment of the country not being fully represented. And then we have another segment of the country that was being appeased, because when colonialists come to a native country, in order for them to stop or stamp out any form of resistance, they try to include some of the natives in their affairs so that people will feel like they belong or they're included in those affairs, and they will become defenders of the status quo. The colonialists mastered that. So the natives in Bathurst and Combos and Marys were able to go to school, and they were able to get menial jobs in government, which is being clerks. And through that, they were kind of absorbed into the system, while the rest of the country was left out. So this was the stage. This is what was obtaining in the Gambia prior to the coming of the People's Progressive Party into the political space of the Gambia. And how that happened and how the agitation went on will be what we'll be talking about in the next video. So we're just trying to lay the foundation, the groundwork for what was happening in the country when politics proper took shape in the Gambia. Because this is something that you need to know. It's your country. It will get to a point when we will not be able to leave our countries. We'll be condemned to where we are. So the sooner we start trying to fix our countries, the better for us, especially for the younger generation. There is so much division, so much toxicity in our politics that neighbors are against neighbors now. People go out in public and say harsh things against an entire segment of the country just because of what? We differ politically. That doesn't augur well for any country, and we shouldn't sit by and watch it get out of hand. There's enough history for us to learn from to avoid the mistakes that were done by other countries or other generations before us. We are condemned to live together, so we need to be able to live together in peace, in harmony, and further the interests of everyone that lives in our community, which is the Gambia. So key factors that you need to understand. The country was divided into the colony and the protectorate, which was the rest of the country. The whole entire Gambia was the protectorate. Then you have Bathurst and Combo St. Mary's, which is what the locals call Combo Tuba Banco. Access to representation and access to amenities and education facilities was restricted to the colony area. The rest of the country was cast out. But because of lack of economic opportunities and because the farming that the people shifted from food crops to cash crops was not yielding the money that they need to be able to subsist on, young people started migrating from the provinces to come to the coastal areas, which is Combo St. Mary's and Bathurst, to work at the docks or to be day laborers for whatever job they can find, make a little bit of money and send it back to their people. That was the situation, and they got exposed to the inequalities and the injustice. Banjul was not anything to brag about back then also, because the British didn't think of the natives as anything. But in order to tamp down any form of resistance, they gave them some form of representative power that they could see themselves wielding. So they were not completely excluded. But it was not like they were living large and the rest of the country was not known. They were just close to the seat of power, and some of the benefits for that accrues to them, and the rest of the country is left out. Edward Francis Small was one person who agitated for the fact that people paying taxes need to be represented. They need to have a voice. And because of the discrimination that was faced by these rural natives when they came to the colony area, they decided to form associations, welfare associations, to look after each other in times of need. From those welfare associations sprung a political movement. And that's what we're going to get into for you to understand the context out of which was born our modern political differences and political struggles and political infrastructure that led us to independence, and then what happened post-independence. So, if this message resonates with you, if you're interested to know about our journey as a country, please subscribe, hit the notification button, and you will get to hear more about our evolution as a country, because you need to be empowered. Information is power, but it is useless if all you get is the information and you don't act on it. People seek knowledge so they can act on it and better themselves. We'll see you again next week.